Good evening and welcome to the Finding You podcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Tuesday, June 9th, 2026. Tonight I'm going to be talking about faith and therapy, and that's not just a random topic. This comes out of a podcast I recently did. In fact, it was just dropped yesterday on the 8th with a podcast called the Mormon Stories Podcast, where I talk about my own story into the church and out of the church and really share during the second half of the interview. It's a long interview, 3 hours. Share kind of my philosophy, how this journey has informed my spiritual and psychological growth. So I'm going to get into that. Let me get into some housekeeping items before we get into that. As you all know, Finding You, our flagship program, the one that we encourage everybody to start with, the Finding You Intensive. The next available offering is an online option, July 26th through 28th. It's about half of the price, a third of the price, and about half of the time as the regular one, and you don't have to travel. So if you're looking for something affordable where you can really get a deep dive or an acceleration to your therapy, this is that offering on June 26th. April 5th will be the next in-person offering, April 5th through 9th, September 9th through 13th after that. If you're looking for any other inquiries for private intensives for couples or families, if you want to join our support group, if you're an alumni, we have that on the third Wednesday of each month. So the next one will be June 20th. You can email us at our email address, info@findingyouprograms.com, or go to our portal and contact us there. We can also help set you up with a coach or a therapist if that's something you want. If this model that I teach and talk about resonates with you, we can match you up with a coach or a therapist who understands and works within this model. We're not going to be doing a Finding You in July because Emma and I are going to be returning. We're so grateful to be returning to the Omega Institute in Rhinebeck, New York, in the Hudson Valley in New York. This is a 5-day workshop that we'll be hosting. We're calling it The Audacity to Be You, Learn to Love Your Horrible, Rotten Self. If you're interested, it's a really affordable workshop where you get practical and experiential opportunities to learn about yourself and to do the work. So that's July 12th through 17th. If you're interested, go to their website, eomega.org. That's eomega.org. Click on the workshops tab and then look for my title, The Audacity to Be You. I will be in Boone, North Carolina in the fall, September 27th through October 2nd, with Emma again, teaching and facilitating that same course. The Art of Living Retreat Center, if you're interested in that one, if the timing or the geography works better for you, then we'd love to see you there. The website for that is artoflivingretreatcenter.org. That's artoflivingretreatcenter.org. Again, go to the tab for workshops, click on the Audacity to Be You, Learn to Love Your Horrible, Rotten Self, and we look forward to having you join us. With that, let me get into tonight's content. So I want to kind of give an overlay. Like I said, this was inspired by the fact that I had recently recorded a podcast with a podcaster here in Utah called Mormon Stories. I'm a former Mormon, and he likes to ask questions for people to tell their story. So as I thought about this and thought about some of his questions, I thought I really want to speak to this idea of faith and therapy and the interplay between the two of them, because I see a lot of overlap in so many ways. I'm not going to be talking against any religion ever. And in a sense, I'm going to be talking for every religion as we go along tonight. So part of what I want to talk about is the universal ideas, truths, concepts that lend themselves to all of these faiths and what it means to have faith. I want to talk about this idea principally that the relationship between our mental health and the quality of our faith is a link that we have to understand and pay attention to. So I'll get into that as we go along. First, from the foreword of The Audacity to Be You, written by my therapist, Jamie Gill, she writes, "What does a well-trained therapist look like? A well-trained therapist is an expert at listening. He or she wants to hear how you feel, not how you are supposed to feel. He or she will try to find you where you are. He or she will try to find out how it feels to be you, with your history, your dilemmas, your hopes and fears. If instead of trying to hear and find you, your therapist has the right answer for you, find another therapist. The right answer will be the therapist's answer and not your answer. This will likely duplicate the ways in which you were treated by your parents." So in this first paragraph, we start to understand a little bit about that idea in faith when it's talked about from a psychological perspective. I share with you very often that if the road before you is clear, if the path before you is clear, that's one indication that it's not your path. That means it's somebody else's path. So the faith in this context is related to our attachment, how secure our attachment is. When I think about spirituality in the 12-step world, and I think about the concept of letting go, and I write about this, I say, it's not about letting go, isn't. This is really important because I've dealt with this for 30 years with parents. Letting go doesn't mean that you have enough trust in your child, for example, or your partner or whomever, that you have confidence that they're going to do the right thing by you. That's trust. And that's something you get to decide how much of it to have. Nobody can tell you, nobody can dictate. You get to decide how much you trust this other person. But it's yours to own. The trust is yours to own, right? We want to make it objective, like this is just the way that it is, but you can trust people that others might and vice versa. But what letting go really means is not that I trust you that you'll make the right decision, but that I trust myself, that I'm going to be okay no matter what decision you make. So we start to think about this shift in psychologically informed spirituality, and we start to understand that faith is kind of a confidence, an inner trust. It's a place that you can go to feel safe. It's inside of your own body. If you had a childhood where you developed a secure attachment, then that's inherent in you. If you developed an anxious attachment, then you're going to be prone to what most people are prone to, which is you're going to try to control people, places, and things. So letting go is letting go of that control because you know that you're going to be okay. It doesn't mean you don't assert yourself or set boundaries. It means that ultimately you're not clinging so tightly to other people's perceptions, ideas, beliefs, feelings, decisions, and behaviors that it robs you of your own serenity, of your own peace. And so when I think about faith and therapy, I want to be as emphatic as I can at the outset. That at Finding You and in my own practice, we're not interested in anybody moving in or out of a religion, having a certain dogma or doctrine that they subscribe to. That does not matter to us. What we're looking at is how related to you, how are you relating to yourself? How are you relating to others? How are you relating to the faith itself? And if the faith becomes something that you cling to tightly to remove that anxiety of uncertainty, if that's the goal of it, then like I'm going to talk about a little bit later, it could be a spiritual bypass, or it could be evidence of an insecure attachment, an anxious attachment that needs and will benefit from our attention. My role, our role at Finding You is not to give you my truth so that you might adopt it. My role as a therapist, as I see it, is to be with you in a way, to hold space for you. We call it container in analysis. To hold space for you in a way, to create an experience for you that you can find your own truth. So that you don't have to defer and outsource to an authority figure, but you develop kind of an inner compass. And that becomes the measure for you about right and wrong, good and bad, the moral decisions that you make. I had a friend and colleague who has the unique position of being in recovery, of being in therapy and being a therapist, and also being a clergy, a member of the clergy. His name is Ian Crone, Ian Morgan Crone. He's also very popular with those who study and go by the Enneagram. But as a guest on my podcast, he said, at a certain point, I realized that my life's purpose sort of came to me in this moment, which was to help people enter into a deeper conversation with the mystery of our own lives. And what Ian did so well is he talked about this parallel between his religious practice and his therapy practice and how similar they were to each other. To be in relationship to the mystery of your life in an authentic, meaningful way is to live a spiritual life. And I love that idea. Rumi's teacher, Shams Tabrizi, once said, the summary of and the advice of all the prophets is this: Find yourself a mirror. And think about that. That is so much what we talk about on these broadcasts, right? It is to find somebody who can see you, find somebody who's interested in finding you instead of fixing you. Find somebody who has a sense of who you are and is willing to introduce you to yourself as gently as possible. So according to Shams Tabrizi, the clergy, right? The religious leaders essentially serve the same purpose as therapists do today. They provide you a mirror. And ideally, hopefully, and I would argue most effectively, that mirror is bathed in compassion and non-judgment. Joseph Campbell once wrote, "My definition of mythology is other people's religion. All religions are true," he stated, "but none are literal." I think about this all the time with atheists. When I hear people make a case for atheism or state their atheism, what they miss is the idea that if you take religion metaphorically, symbolically, then it can have incredible effects on you without coming up against this idea of the literal nature of it. See, Campbell studied all myths and kind of found this pattern, this algorithm, and was discerning enough to recognize that myths are this kind of shared dream, that this story that emerges that people resonate with. It's not necessarily because the story is literal, but it resonates with something in the human soul. And if that story endures through time, generation after generation, it is said that it is something more universal, something that is part of what Carl Jung called the collective unconscious. Something that's out there that all life, all human beings, all conscious beings can relate to, can see themselves in. Mythology is other people's religion, and all religions are true, but none are literal. Campbell went on to explain that mythology, and again, you replace it with religion, that word with religion. Mythology, in other words, he said, is psychology, misread as biography, history, and cosmology. What he was saying was they didn't have the breadth and the depth of language we have now today to describe human behavior, where it comes from, why people do what they do, how do they get sick, how do they get well, all those questions that we all grapple with that I talk about on these episodes. But they had their stories, their gods, their goddesses, their heroic journeys that they talked about. And within those stories was this description of a transformation that can happen as you grow up, right? It's just like a movie. A movie that endures falls under the same kind of category, that serves the same kind of purpose, a book or a story. It shows the transformation of a character, the protagonist, where at the beginning they're lacking some critical element to their character in the everyday world, and something happens to them, some crisis, some difficulty, and they go out and search for the solution. And what we find in these stories is that the solution never has an address, not a destination, right? Henry Miller, the writer, said, "One's destination is never a place, but a new way of seeing things." And in Campbell's mythology teachings, he explains that heaven or hell aren't literal places with an address. They are metaphors for a state of being. So it's not about you should do this so you'll go to heaven. It sounds more like if you operate in these ways, it tends to bring you peace. If you don't operate in these ways or violate these ideas, these laws, these rules, whatever they are, you'll find yourself alone and miserable, unhappy, addicted. So it's this idea that we talk about. I love this idea that sometimes we think and we look back on something like Greek mythology and we think to ourselves, how ridiculous were they? to imagine that that's the way that the metaphysical universe existed. With all of these gods, these strange gods, and the roles that they played. Sometimes petty fights, jealousies, weird battles, and we, the humans, are just in the middle of it. And we really think in some sense they must have been really primitive Homo sapiens to believe that. In reality, what Campbell argues is they knew it was a metaphor. But it is we today who have lost our spiritual way that we discern about those things in terms of their literal nature or not. So once we understand that these stories have valuable, ageless lessons in them, it changes our relationship to them. We're not so interested in looking for the literal place that something happened or whether or not it happened or proof, and we're trying to understand the message. I was reading a book by James Hillman, a Jungian therapist, and I found this quote that I love from Sallis. He said, "Myth never happened, but always is." And I once said, I love it when our science catches up to our myths, and we're finding that. We're seeing how our myths, and I'm not just talking about Western Judeo-Christian myths or even Islam. I'm talking about all of our stories, all of recorded history, stories from other cultures. That's what makes it so amazing. You find a story from a culture that lived thousands of years ago, and you see that the lessons are the same. I remember in reading Homer's work, right? The Iliad and the Odyssey. There's so many examples where they welcome people into their home. They welcome a guest with a certain kind of honor. And one of the reasons they did this is they understood, or they talked about it in this way that, you know, Zeus or Apollo or Athena could take on the form of another person. So you wouldn't want to offend the gods by rejecting a guest because it could be a god or a goddess. That's not very different from what was taught, again, in the religion that I was raised in, which was Christianity. That's not very different from the idea of treat your neighbor as yourself. Right? The lessons are the same. The Greeks knew it. Jesus knew it. He had studied them. He understood this idea as a teacher. I love this quote. I recently saw it on a stand-up comedy routine. I think Pete Holmes is his name, but he was talking about God and religion and quoted Campbell a couple of times. And he said one of the most important lessons he learned about spirituality and religion was from the road manager for Barry Taylor, which I looked up, and Barry Taylor was indeed the road manager for a while for AC/DC, but he's also a theologian. And Barry Taylor said, God is the name of the blanket we throw over the mystery to give it a shape. So when I talk about in this podcast that I did yesterday that all of it's God, that's what I'm talking about. It's all God. Me, you, the desk, the chair, the house, the trees outside, the animals. It's all the mystery. And my own, doesn't matter. I'm not trying to convince anybody of anything, but my own way of thinking about it is that it's all sacred. It's all sacred and it's all connected. We are not separate from each other. We are not separate from other life forms. We are not separate from our environment. Freud said, the truths contained in religious doctrines are so distorted and systematically disguised that the mass of humanity cannot recognize them as truth. We are telling the truth in symbolic clothing. You see, I love to bring this up. Jung said that or maybe it was Joseph Campbell actually said that myths are a public dream and dreams are a private myth. So when you go to sleep at night and you dream, analytical therapy teaches us, Jungian and Freudian therapy teaches us that is your unconscious speaking and disguising and dressing itself up in symbolic clothing, giving you a message. And you can actually use your dreams to understand yourself better with a practice and a discipline and some help. But the one thing about dreams is they always tell the truth. Even when they're lying, they tell the truth. Meaning that there's some truth in the lie, in what's being depicted in the dream. It's as nonsensical and can be, but it's as honest as can be. So really, it's not about, again, in our way of thinking of therapy. When I welcome a client, I don't care if they're a Muslim, Jewish, Christian, atheist, agnostic. That's not the thought that I'm having. That I don't pay attention to that. I just want to understand if they can get a sense of their own spiritual self, their spiritual nature. This yearning for transcendence, for meaning, for something bigger than them to connect themselves to, where they fit. So the role of the therapist, as we see it at Finding You, is to be a container, not a converter. Like I said at the outset, I'm going to speak against any religion because I subscribe to the same idea that Campbell subscribes to, that they're all true if understood metaphorically. More than that, I want to see, how is it helping you? What's your relationship to your higher power? What's your relationship to yourself? And there's a close connection between relationship to self and a higher power that I'll talk about a little bit later. This is adapted from Joseph Campbell. Each therapy model is a different story that explains mental illness and mental health. The task is to find the one that speaks to you. For it is your faith in the story that will heal you. And I love this next quote from E.A. Bennett in his writings called Meetings with Jung. I asked Jung, what cures? And he said, you can cure anything if you believe in it. You can cure neuroses with hypnotism or with a walking stick if that's what you believe in. Freud was kind to people and gave them his interest. That was what cured, and that is always what cures. The human contact. What you believe in is the cure. And the research for this idea actually plays itself out. The most important variable in research studies is often whatever the therapist believes in the most is the thing that works. So in the example, they give therapists several models to operate from in doing therapy, and then they study outcomes. All of the best outcomes are where the therapist was using the model, the technique, the conceptualization of the model that they most preferred, and the other ones had less effect. Now, hopefully, at Finding You, we're going to meet you where you're at. I love using people's religious backgrounds, no matter what it is, to explore their spiritual self, because it's all in there. It's all in there. D.W. Winnicott is famous for teaching the idea of containing. And he talks about how really it's a holding environment. It's taking in the child or the other person, what they're feeling, what they're saying, how they're acting, metabolizing it, and then offering back a sense that they're okay, that you see them, that you understand them. Bion talks about the container, another analyst talks about the container for the thing that cannot yet be named, the thing that we're afraid to say to anybody. I came across this quote. I'm going to try to pronounce his name this time. Fyodor Dostoevsky. I came close. Once wrote, I want to talk about everything with at least one person the way I talk about things with myself. And I think I've been looking for that my whole life. I can't overstate this, that ability to have at least one person found you can make all the difference in the world. The good news is you don't need everybody to find you. But ideally, you have at least one person that can find you. And that starts to change your nervous system. Just being found, understood, seen. Most of us have in mind that when somebody's especially symptomatic, we have to fix it. It's dangerous. It's scary. It's out of control. But what we think about in analysis or attachment-based therapy, depth psychology, the kind of therapy we practice here, what we see is that when somebody is understood, it kind of does the healing. Right? I think it was Rumi who said, I'm not going to change anybody. I'm here to love people, and love will be their teacher. Right? It's this idea that by being exposed to an empathic, non-judgmental other, we develop a sense of ourself in very profound, grounded ways that we don't experience. And what I also learned for myself and for other people If you don't get seen by somebody at the critical times in childhood, you may spend your life trying to get everybody to see you, everybody to recognize you. That's what narcissism looks like. Is everybody, I have to seduce everybody. I have to get everybody on my side. But if I have the experience of being found and truly seen, not just the pretty parts, the smart parts, the parts that make money, the talented parts, whatever it is, the fast runner, the good dancer, whatever. If I get seen, if all of me gets seen, and if I can integrate those parts of myself that I got rid of to fit in other and past contexts, then I don't need anybody to see me. I'm okay because I recognize that their inability to see me is about their consciousness, not about me. So we don't try to control you or guide you. I think one of the things that we do so well is we meet you where you're at, come as you are. We don't ask you to trust the process, because if you don't trust the process, we assume you have a good reason for not trusting the process. We're not eager to get rid of your symptoms because we think your symptoms are messengers from the unconscious that's trying to ask for something, that's seeking something out. So we don't control. The containing therapist holds. It does not coerce, it holds. And the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh wrote it this way. He said, you must love in such a way that the other person you love feels free. So it's not about directing you to a certain direction. I remember one of my children several years ago said something about ghosts or some new age philosophy that they were identifying with. And I said something that I'm embarrassed of. I said something shaming because it was too far for me at the time. And after a while, after thinking about it and some time passing, I realized I don't have all the answers for what's true in the metaphysical universe. I don't know. See, when I was younger, I used to know. When I was younger, I needed to know the answers. I needed certainty. Religion for me became a defense against the uncertainty and ambiguity of life. A way to kind of ward it off. I found absolute answers to questions. But in this way of thinking, that becomes a spiritual bypass. So I came back to my son a couple of years later and I said, I'm really sorry about what I said to you. And there's many more apologies around that. And I said it was ridiculous of me to assume that I knew the truth and the facts about the metaphysical universe. I know so little. And of course, he let me have it. He gave it back to me, which I deserved. Another thing that I look for in religious practices is something that the Buddhists in the Eastern religions refer to as non-duality. This is beyond good and evil, self and others, right? They're all kind of connected. In Western thought, we've really separated out the devil and God, right? Like those are the opposites, sin and righteousness. But like depth psychology, like Jungian Freudian psychology, like attachment-based therapy, we see that what we call evil is just fear, is woundedness, that people that get hurt other people if they don't heal. I remember I was watching a TV show and there was a scene where some indigenous people were talking to some white people. There was some conflict over land and things like that. And the white people hired an indigenous attorney to represent them, I think wisely. And when she was meeting with the leaders, after she left, the leader said to his second in command, sort of, he said, man, that woman is evil. And his companion said, she's just scared. And then the leader said, well, what do you think evil is? That's what it is. So we think about it as messengers to pay attention to. We're not interested in killing the messenger and getting rid of it. We're interested in understanding what it's trying to tell us, what need went unmet, what is it asking of the others around them. I love this quote from a great teacher, He was asked the question, how are we to treat others? And his response was, there was no others. There are no others. How are we to treat others? There are no others. When you know yourself, you know that everybody's just a little bit different, but you know at a fundamental level, we're all the same. I see this happen in therapy all the time. I used to run a treatment center for young people, as most of you know. And the early stages of therapy, the young men would say, "Oh, I'm nothing like these guys. They're the worst." And they would list all the ways in which they're different than the guy sitting next to them. But if you visited them 3 or 4 weeks later, it would sound very different. They would say, "You know what? My issue wasn't drugs, or I never self-harmed, or I never stole from my grandparents. But my drug was anger. My drug was control. My drug was sex, gambling, whatever." So the small details are different, but the fundamental human dilemma is the same. So when you know yourself, you kind of have a glimpse at others, right? When Carl Jung said the best method for understanding darkness in others is to know your own darkness. And remember, when we in this kind of psychology use words like darkness and demons, ghosts, being haunted, we are speaking metaphorically in this psychology. And if it's literal for you, that's fine too, it works. If it has the same meaning. So once you know yourself, you realize that you're connected to everybody else, that you're not separate. And then when you see somebody else get hurt, it hurts you because in a sense, it is happening to you also, to your extended self. Charles Eisenstein said it this way: we are inseparate from the universe. This interbeing is something we can feel. When another is harmed, it is literally happening to ourselves, our extended selves. I've heard great teachers say that if they could remove one idea from just about everybody, it would be the idea that we're separate. If you're about my age, you might have remembered the movie Masked that was based on a true story. Cher was in it. It was about the young man who had a very distorted face from what's typical, some kind of disease where it grew differently. And he had that experience too, that experience that tells us that we are separate, that we are different. The movie Powder, I loved the movie Powder. Jeff Goldblum is in it. Mary Steenburgen is in it. I loved it also. Same thing. This one kid who had kind of these psychic powers noted that everybody has this spot, he pointed to their brain. I assume he meant metaphorically, but maybe that's an important part of the brain. And he said they have this belief that they are separate from everybody. So the psychological work is spiritual. The psychological work is communing with God. Your definition of God changes quite differently as the work goes on, but that's just a part of everybody's faith journey. In some ways, the God that you believed in when you were a child is not the same God you believe in now, even if you call that God by the same name. You have a different relationship, a different understanding. The complexity of your own experience enriches your understanding of your version of God, your higher power. I love what Ram Dass. These are two wonderful quotes from Baba Ram Dass. If you haven't heard them, this is well worth listening to. Under the category of non-duality again. He said, when you go into the woods and you look at trees, you see all these different trees, and some of them are bent. You sort of understand that it didn't get enough light, and so it turned that way. And you don't get all emotional about it. You just allow it. The minute you get near humans, you lose all that. And you are constantly saying, you are to this, I'm to this. That judgment mind comes in. And so I practice turning people into trees, which means appreciating them just the way they are. In another spot, he says this: a lot of people try to counteract the I am not good enough with I am good enough. In other words, they take the opposite and they try to invest it. But that still keeps the world at the level of polarities, he explains. The art is to go behind the polarities. So the act is not to go to the world of I am good to counteract I am bad or I am lovable as opposed to I am unlovable, but to go behind it to I am. I am. I am. And I am includes the fact that I do crappy things and I do beautiful things, and I am. And that includes everything, and I am. You see, I said once that the outcome of psychotherapy is realizing that you are a disaster and a miracle all at once, all at the same time. There's so much paradox and ambiguity, and everything's just gray in this work. And when you accept yourself, just think about that. Just accepting that you are a disaster and a miracle, if you could let that soak into your body, you would have compassion for everybody else because you know that they'd be fighting the same battles. Judgment goes away. Ram Dass said that ultimately enlightenment is to judge nothing. And that doesn't mean that he was sitting around passively not doing anything. That just means that he could be present with anything without the labels, without deeming them more or less, good or bad, but just what they are. Charles Eisenstein wrote, evil is not a evil is a consequence, not a cause. Charles Eisenstein. That's one of the things that happened when I started studying psychology, being in a religion. I started to understand that the way that therapy, psychology, was describing the human being's spiritual experience, spiritual life, what was more complex, more detailed, contained a lot richer ideas than kind of the simplicity of the religion that I was raised in. But maybe most importantly is that this kind of psychology, the kind of psychology that I teach and I talk about, that I've learned, removes judgment. It increases compassion. We are afraid of that. We think we have to cling to judgment. We think we have to know who's an other, what's bad. It's out there. We've got to keep away from it. But I've learned about the mystics and the great spiritual leaders is they all know that they are just the same as everybody else. So their compassion is a result of their inner work. I've said this before, if you don't have compassion for the sick and the dying and the sinners and the desperate, if you don't have compassion for people, then you haven't learned self-compassion. I'll say this as clear as I can. Self-awareness, which is the foundation of all of this work, it's the foundation of attachment, of intimacy, of nonviolence. Self-awareness is the kind of cornerstone of all of that. But self-compassion is only as good, self-awareness is only as good as your self-compassion. Self-awareness is only as good as your self-compassion. Because if you have judgments, you won't be able to see the parts in yourself that you've been taught to hate and fear. It'll be too overwhelming. You'll convince yourself that they don't exist, or they're not that bad, or you're not like other people. See, in this work, we see ourselves in the sinner, right? We see ourselves in the crooked politician. We see ourselves in the people out there, and we are humbly grateful to not have been put in the circumstances that they must be in or must have been in, to be in such pain to hurt people so much. Because they are literally, in this metaphorical sense, literally, if I can use those two words together, they are literally in hell. And the ones who need love the most are the ones that are the hardest to show it. But the thing that cures, maybe more than anything, heals more than anything, is grace. Is being accepted for who we are, for our own horrible, rotten selves. You know, you walk into a 12-step meeting, you eventually share, you confess how you've hurt the people that you love. You walk into a CODA meeting, you do the same thing, and everybody throws their arms around you. They don't recoil. It doesn't get awkwardly quiet. It is really, in my experience, the closest thing to a temple I've ever experienced is a 12-step group or a Finding You intensive where a group of people are holding space compassionately for another person. And that's what happens at Finding You, and it changes you. It changes you. You will know things about yourself that you don't know in other contexts. You'll be in touch with yourself in such a deeper and more personal way because of the safety. And that will change you. I wrote once, there are no rules, only love and fear. The basic kind of substance of the universe. This is what Joseph Campbell talked about. This is what Star Wars was about, which is based on Joseph Campbell's work. Is the two kind of fundamental ingredients in our spiritual life is our relationship to fear and love. Love is safety. Love is I have enough for myself that I want to give to you. And giving to you feels like giving to me. And I give because it feels good to give, not because of what you will give me back, right? This is love. Fear is leads to the defense. I have to protect myself against the threat. That's the definition of a defense. It's something that we put in place in the face of a threat. We try to control things and people. We need things to go a certain way. Love says I'll be all right no matter what happens. And if I can connect myself to something larger than myself, like a higher power, a higher purpose, as Nietzsche says, if I have a why, I can bear almost any how. But if I find myself alone and isolated and alienated in hell, Thich Nhat Hanh says, hell is a real place. It's a place where there's no compassion, and we've all been to hell. If I'm operating from fear, if I don't want to feel hurt again, if I don't want to feel pain, that's how Darth Vader was seduced to go to the dark side. He didn't want to feel more pain. And then, of course, paradoxically, later on, the thing that brought him out of the dark side was watching his own child suffer under the same teachings and the same ideas that were inflicted upon him. So if there's one message I could give to the world, it is we've got to understand our relationship to fear and what it does to us. All the shoulds and the shouldn'ts and the dark places we've been told not to visit, the demons we've been told to be afraid of that are inside of us, chasing our demons. All of that stuff would dissipate in the face of love and grace. And we've been told to be absolutely frightened of this kind of philosophy. We are told that people will be out of control. And it does get kind of wild a little bit. But in the long run, and someone who embarks on this path that I'm describing, regardless of their religious background, somebody who's willing to go into the cave that they fear to enter, as Campbell says, the cave that you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek. If we're willing to walk into the forest like King Arthur's knights, where there was no path, because if there was a path, that meant someone else's marched it, that's faith. The thing that was most upsetting to me about this particular episode that I did with Mormon Stories podcast is that I said this to him during it, so if you listen, you'll hear this. He asked me the question, when did you lose your faith? And I said, I don't think of it as losing faith. I think of my faith as transforming and growing larger. I feel more connected, more compassionate, less afraid than I ever have. I may have lost my identification with a specific sect or religion, but now I feel more connected to people of all faiths and all religions. And what I know is that your mental health is, in large part, the foundation of your spiritual practice. Because if you haven't transformed your mental health, then you will use your religion like a superstition to try to control the outside. You'll pray for bad things not to happen, instead of feeling that you'll be okay no matter what happens. Alan Watts once explained, he was talking about this idea that everybody is part of this God, this idea, this blanket, this over the mystery. He says, wake up and find out who you really are. In our culture, they'll say you're crazy. But in India, they'll say, oh, congratulations, at last you found out. Watts is famous for saying that if Jesus grew up in India, they wouldn't have killed him. They would have said, congratulations, you figured it out. And this might, for some people, sound like heresy, but for me, the fruits of it speak for themselves. Love, compassion, non-judgment. I'm able to offer healing energy when I'm in that space that Watts is talking about. Rumi once said, the desire to know your own soul will end all other desires. And I have found that personally to be true. When I'm in touch with my being, it doesn't happen all the time every day, but when I'm present with myself, everything else is okay. And I feel connected to everybody, connected to people that are long gone, to previous generations, to all of humanity. And that is the transcendent experience. That is the experience of the divine for me. So a lot of times when people say they've lost or don't have or struggle with their relationship to a higher power, in many ways that's akin to saying that they've lost connection to themselves. Rumi also said somewhere else, I searched for God and found nothing but myself. And then I searched for myself and found nothing but God. A large part, I talk about this all the time, that sitting with uncertainty and ambiguity is a large measure, a good way to measure your mental health. Uncertainty, in some ways, is the clearest indication of your growth. If you are a little bit less sure, that's a sign of your growth. I am less sure today at 58 years old than I was at 48, 38, 28. I had all the answers at 21. I knew the whole plan, the whole universe. I understood the whole thing. And now I'm not so sure. Now I'm learning. Now I'm still investigating. But ultimately, this is what was meant when a philosopher once said, don't let God stand in the relationship of your relationship with, don't let God stand in your relationship in the way of your relationship with God. Sometimes these ideas about God get in the way of this transcendent experience that we can have in a 12-step meeting, that we can have in a finding you, that we can have an individual therapy, that we can have when we feel safe enough to take off our armor with our partner. My son-in-law, Jordan June, Dr. Jordan June, who is an expert in talking about religion in these ways, wrote in a book that he's working on that says a simple story can feel safer than a complex reality. And that is, in essence, what we mean when we say that religion can become a defense against the divine in the way of the divine experience. John Keats wrote, capable of being in uncertainties, mysteries, doubts, without any irritable reaching after fact and reason, is his definition of spirituality. Can you sit in not knowing? Can you sit with these metaphors as a way of understanding and talking about the mystery that nobody knows the answer to? And I love what Anne Lamott said. She said, the opposite of faith is not doubt, but certainty. In a little bit more of a psychological perspective, Marie-Louise von Franz, Jung's client and later protege, was teaching about Jung, and she said, to be in a situation where there's no way out, or to be in a conflict where there's no solution, is the classical beginning of the process of individuation. The unconscious wants the helpless conflict in order to put the ego up against the wall. We think that it is our conscious brain that is directing our lives. That is not true. So much of our unconscious material is in the driver's seat. So these conflicts that we come up against in our lives, like I don't know how to match up what I'm learning in therapy and what I'm learning on Saturday or Sunday from my religious leader. How do I reconcile the two? That is the beginning of the individuation, the hero's journey, the figuring out for yourself what it is. And as Campbell points out, living on borrowed light doesn't work forever. Eventually, you'll have to go it alone. You might have heard the word spiritual bypass. Here's my definition. Spiritual bypass is when we avoid these feelings that I've been describing. Uncertainty, ambiguity. Is when we avoid these feelings and concepts in exchange for dogma and certainty. When we can't sit with uncertainty and doubt, we become delayed. Anything that seeks to alleviate the anxiety inherent in these experiences threatens to hinder our spiritual development. Can you sit with the mystery? Or do you need absolute answers? Richard Rohr, who is a Catholic priest and a psychoanalytic writer, said, as Zen masters are known to say, avoid spirituality if at all possible. It is one insult after another. That's what therapy is. Like my therapist said, it gets, avoid therapy if you can, because the news just gets worse and worse. There's these moments of humiliation that I experience in therapy and around therapy where I realize who I thought I was is not who I am. How good I convinced myself I am, I'm not all that. Jung said the spiritual journey is a series of small humiliations of the false self that become more and more profound. And Richard Rohr said, I have prayed for years for one good humiliation a day, and then I must watch my reaction to it. So today, my relationship with the humiliation has changed because of these guys. Now I welcome the small humiliations. Now I want the small humiliations. I might say something in this broadcast that I'll be humiliated about later. I've got to think that's a possibility, right? Because it's happened so many times before. If I believe everything the exact same way I do today, 5 or 10 years from now, it could be argued that I've wasted 5 or 10 years. The humiliation is when the ego is confronted with the reality that it can't deny. I did something that I thought I could not do. I thought I would not do. I showed up, I said something, I acted in such a way that I thought was not a part of me. Like I said, your religion is only as good as your mental health. Somebody asked me what I meant by this, and I just meant if you're not in a mentally healthy space, you will use religion as a defense. Sometimes even as an offense. You will keep yourself safe in ways that wouldn't be commensurate with what I would call spiritual. You will pray to control other people, places, and things, instead of using prayer as a time to meditate and get in touch with the divine. So that can fluctuate. But if we don't experience a transformation of consciousness, we will use whatever tools we are offered, whatever ideas we are offered in the service of that consciousness. And if you're still trying to be good, to be certain, and to defend against the uncertainty of life, then your religion and your religious practice will reflect that. When I left my religious practice, this is me talking, when I left my religious practice, I assumed that I left guilt and shame behind with it. But after a short time, I realized they still followed me. They had just changed their clothing from the religious vestments to the therapist's attire. So the need to be good, the need to be right, the need to not be bad, the need to know absolute answers. I've got to stay on guard for that, like everybody. I've got to grieve what my losses. I've got to be in touch with what I'm powerless over. You know the phrase, if you live by the sword, you die by the sword? It's of course not about sword fighting. It's about if you use this kind of masculine, I should say masculine, not male, this masculine force of energy to try to control things, you'll suffer from it. It doesn't mean you'll be killed from it. It just means that you will suffer. I love the idea from my co-author of my new book. He said he found God in all the places that he was told to fear. Jeff McLean. I found God in the places I was told to fear. And to tell you the truth, me too. And that's actually where it's most easy for me to find God, in all the places I was told to be afraid of. So when I think about the stigma of treatment, of 12-step meetings, of self-help workshops, whatever it is. I don't want to be seen as not knowing. I don't want to be seen as weak. I don't want to be seen as broken. That's why we go to those places, to heal that thought process. And this is kind of a combination with Rumi and Campbell. Your failing marriage or your struggling child is the medicine. Each stumble, each fear is the call to the heroic adventure. And as Rumi said, these pains are messengers. They are messages. Listen to them. So in this kind of therapy, we're not that interested in symptom reduction. We're interested in finding you. That will reduce the symptoms. And it'll reduce them from a foundational place, not from a superficial place. I was asking Ian Morgan Crone on my podcast about the difference that he felt in the role between being a pastor, priest, and being a therapist. And he said, for him, to be told you are broken and you are beautiful, you are both. You are loved and you are forgiven. He said, I need that on a pretty regular basis. And I think all humans do. And he finds that in both the therapist's office and on Sunday. So find the story that works for you. And it will be your faith in it that heals you. Hold an attitude of faith and recognize that if your faith is just to try to control what is uncontrollable, then it's a bypass. Learn to read the metaphors and the messages in religious traditions as kind of a map of your interior. Right? The Odyssey is not about a guy taking a trip. The Odyssey is about finding your own soul and all the things, the sirens, everything that gets in the way. The journey back home is a journey to himself. And it wasn't just the Greeks that were teaching about this. In my estimation, this is what all myths talk about. There's some fighter jets going overhead. That usually doesn't happen around here. So I'm just going to pause for about 10 seconds and see if it goes down. That's loud. Give me just a minute. I'm almost done. Watch out for control. Remember that you'll do more to help heal, contribute to healing by containing somebody, holding space for them, than you will by trying to control them. Be wary of spirituality, spiritual practices, traditions that run on guilt and shame. Those tend to create and come from trauma. And this journey is away from those. We learn to kill the dragon of should and should not, as Campbell talks about it, Nietzsche talks about it. And eventually we become ourselves, and that's terrifying. Because we have been told if we don't live up to the rules, the shoulds and the should nots, the commandments, the thou shalt, the ought to, the must, the need to, it will be utter destruction and we'll be alone. And while it is a terrifying middle passage, I have found just the opposite to be true. And your God, your view of God, your view of your higher power will change as you do. But ultimately, for all of us, if we don't learn to deal with our fear, it will run things. It will run our lives and the lives of people around us. And remember, I don't mean that you shouldn't feel fear. I just mean that you need to sort it out. And that can often be best done with a guide, with somebody who's a little farther along this journey than you are. I hope this has been a helpful point of contact, at least from my perspective, about what we do. If you don't know yet, the Finding You Inner Circle has launched. It's a subscription-based paid subscription to the podcast. So $10 a month, $100 a year. You can cancel at any time. If you're an alumni, you get it automatically. You're a part of it. Otherwise, you get a couple of extra episodes a month, and you get to attend all of these live. My 3 books, The Journey of the Heroic Parent, The Audacity to Be You, and my new co-authored book, Stay in the Room, is available on Amazon. Our Audible version will come up a little bit later in the year for Stay in the Room, so we're going to be recording that soon. If you want to join me and my daughter Emma for a workshop, a 5-day workshop for around $500, you can go and meet us at the Omega Institute in New York, July 12th through 17th. Go to eomega.org, click on the workshops tab, and click on the class, The Audacity to Be You. We'll be teaching that same class, facilitating that same group experience at the Art of Living Retreat Center in Boone, North Carolina. Go to artoflivingretreatcenter.org, click on the workshop tabs, and look at the Audacity to Be You. The next in-person intensive will be August 5th. We have a June 26th online option if you want to do it sooner than that. For all other inquiries about intensives for couples or for families, if you want a link to the support group, if you're an alumni, or if you're looking for a coach or a therapist, go to our portal on our website or email us at info@findingyouprograms.com. I'm going to be back next week, a week from today, and I'm going to be talking about how Freud and Jung were right. I'm going to be talking about their approach about psychoanalysis and what it's different than. And really, most of what we're hearing today, if you go on social media, most of the things people are talking about today, Freud and Jung were talking about 100 years ago, 50 years ago, 60 years ago or so. More than that, 80 years ago. So it's really a resurgence. And so it's a misunderstood idea. And since we're so impacted and influenced by Freud and Jung's work, I want to share that from the perspective of a fan who really sees that this kind of philosophy, this kind of conceptualization goes beyond these modern short-term fix yourself, fix the symptom therapies that we are all so fond of, that we find so much in America. All right, folks, thanks for joining me. Any other questions? If you want to send anything, you can email me at info@findingyouprograms.com. And I'll take the question that came up. There was one that came up, and I'll put it to our Ask Me Anything episode where I'll share that next week. I'll be back on Thursday of next week to do an Ask Me Anything episode. So thank you for joining me. I hope it's a helpful point of contact. And for on behalf of the people that love you and the people that you love, thanks for showing up to these and doing your work, because you doing your work makes all the difference in the world. Have a great evening, and I'll talk to you next week. Take care. Bye-bye.